Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Caitlyn Sponheimer, an actor you may know from her appearances in shows like Rain, The Bold Type, The Boys, and Transplant, or her work in video games like Assassin's Creed, Valhalla, and Outriders. She's also a writer, producer, and director, and her first feature, Wild Goat Surf, is now playing in Toronto and Vancouver. Set in the summer of 2003, it's the story of a kid called Goat, played by Shaylin Martin, living in an Okanagan Valley trailer park, determined to go surfing in the Pacific Ocean like the absent father she adores, even though all she has is a lake. It's sweet and it's spiky, and it's a very personal film for Caitlyn, who also appears in the movie as Goat's mom, Jane, and you should check it out. Caitlyn picked The Great Beauty, Paolo Sorrentino's Oscar-winning 2013 opus about Jep Gambardella, an Italian journalist who finds himself, on his 65th birthday, contemplating the superficiality of La Dolce Vita. Starring Sorrentino's regular collaborator Toni Servillo as aging scenester Jep, and placing him in a circus of excess and opulence we can tell is just beginning to curdle, The Great Beauty is an ambitious and frequently dazzling spectacle with a much bigger heart than you might expect. That's why it stands out, I guess. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, it's funny because you're asked to choose one movie, which is such a bananas question for probably anybody. And it's funny because I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to really think about this. And The Great Beauty just popped into my head since I saw it. I saw it years ago, and then I watched it last night. And it's always stuck with me. And pretty much in some way the whole film, even if out of order, a lot of the cinematography, the lighting, so much of it. And there was just some essence in it that I think has actually quite influenced the screenplays I've written since and my work. And so instead of overthinking it, which is something I'm very good at doing, I was like, I'm just going to send the list. And it was such a wild list too, because Jurassic Park was on it too. And other, just so different. But yeah, The Great Beauty, I'm so excited to talk about it because I have two really polar opposite feelings about it.
Okay.
I don't know if either are right or wrong, and I don't know if I'll ever know. So I almost wanted to talk about it with someone who's so educated on film, which is you.
Well, thank you. That's completely unnecessary. I react purely on instinct and intuition. Honestly,
that.
I go with the movie where the movie wants to take me. And I have to say, I am not the biggest fan of Sorrentino. I like The Great Beauty, but I find his films so obsessed with texture that they forget to be about emotion sometimes. And the Great Beauty was the one where, this is right after Il Divo, which was my first time seeing one of his films. It was at Cannes. It was on the media screenings in the Palais, and it was this huge explosion of Sorrentino experience, and I hated it. Il Divo is Toni Servillo is playing a former prime minister of Italy, and he's basically under so much makeup that he looks like Yoda, and it's just or the guy from Six Flags that kind of looks like Dana Carvey in the ads.
I haven't seen those.
Oh, they're on YouTube, I'm sure. And I hated it. I hated it. I hated its excess. I hated its self-satisfaction. That is the point of the film, right? It's about a Berlusconi-like figure who just welcomes corruption and gets away with everything and sits around quietly while other people debate his existence and morality and then just skates. And then this comes out, and it's the same actor and the same director and the same sense of opulence, that 8-minute party sequence that just doesn't stop to introduce you to the world rather than the character. And it works. This is the one that makes sense to me.
So you did like it. Okay, cool. I was oh, I'm wondering where this is going. Yeah, I'm hesitant to say this, but I'll be honest. This is his only film I've seen.
Okay.
And I don't even know why. I can't remember why I watched it, but I remember watching it in a screening room. I think my partner at the time was Italian and was like, you have to see this. And I was like, okay. And then I was just taken aback by it. And that party scene, coming from an acting background, I'm so focused on character. I love character. And So it's a little funny that I chose this film because, yeah, it really is about that character, but there's also this whole like world he's presenting and creating. We are following this one person around, but really his emotional journey is like, I feel like it's almost like if you were gonna sew a jacket, it's like just like we just get like the first loop and then we're done the film almost. Like his his exploration of the character, and not that's not a critique. Like I actually think it's really nice that we see that. But yeah, the 8 minute character scene, like I was like, we don't meet him or dance scene. We don't meet him until 10 minutes in. But then like I think it's like 45 seconds later, we already know like, oh, he's over this. Like he doesn't want to be part of this world, but he's kind of stuck there because it's his birthday.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
It's his 65th birthday. He's very tired.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, I think that's the real shock for me of seeing Servillo without the makeup, without like all the disguises that he'd had on in the previous film. Is like, no, this is just a very tired man, and he's charismatic and he's charming, but it's practiced, right? Like he's done this a million times, and he's sort of tired of being around himself when the movie starts. And it's about, yeah, the first step towards coming back to the person he used to be, and it takes 2.25 hours of our time, but it's taken 30 years of his life to hit that point where the rubber band snaps and pulls him back. Realizing that he was the love of someone's life and never really thought about her again is this great, weird, tragic hook to hang a story of, excess and debauchery on.
Yeah, and that's yeah, it's so interesting, like learning you're the love of somebody's life. And I do wonder if that love lingered with him and then he never found it again. Like never found that depth of connection because really the circles that he's in, and he even says it at some point, like he wanted to be the top, like he wanted to be able to not show up and ruin a party. And I loved that line. Like I was like, wow, like that's so crazy that your presence means so much. And that's what he wanted. He basically wanted to feel power. And it's like, why do we want power? And why do we want these things? And a lot of times it's out of fear. It's like, well, if I maintain that, then I'm safe, then I'm protected. And so it's like maybe he loved this person and then to lose them meant a lot more, like a lot more depth. He had to go and explore why did he stop writing? Same thing, fear. Like he was so good. And I think a big thing is like he made something so great and so celebrated. What if like the next one fails? Which is, I'm sure, uh, I've heard that a lot of artists are so sensitive. I'm very sensitive. And I know that that sensitivity for artists can be the thing that holds them back. And the purpose of making something has to be greater than the fragility you feel in creating it. And I think that he protects himself by hanging out in these like top echelons, but he's really like he really, I think, feels like nothing. Like that's that like that opening quote is so great.
Oh,
And
the Celine
so
quote. Yeah.
long. Yeah, it's so long, but it's so interesting. And even like the tourist dying at the beginning, I'm like, how does this relate to his story and his like emotional trajectory? And I listen to interviews, so I know what Sorrentini thinks, but I'm also curious, like, is it placed there, or is it just to explore the beauty of Rome? Like it's, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering myself, like, is the point that this man has died because he's overwhelmed by how beautiful things are? Is that Sorrentino's statement on Rome? Is that if you pay attention to what's really valuable, you can leave? Like, you just don't need to be there anymore.
Mm.
Or is it just somebody who has lived? Because we know nothing about this guy when we see that opening sequence. Maybe he's just done everything he needed to do, and this is his reward to himself. And what better way to die than somewhere beautiful? I don't know. Like Sorrentino is so frustrating that way because he will just. I thought of this. This is an image that I couldn't get out of my head, or this is a news story that I read that I had to bring to the screen and realize as lavishly as possible.
Yeah.
It's like the use of Dadina, his Jep's editor, who has dwarfism, and as she says, or as she says early on, like it's the first and last thing anyone ever says of me. But he gets to use it against this incredibly pretentious performance artist, Talia Concept, in the very beginning, and say, like, she's looking for writers of stature. It's like, oh, my editor's not going to like hearing that. But I was trying to figure out, is this a film with a character who has dwarfism, an actor who has dwarfism, because that's what we're used to from Fellini, and Sorrentino is sort of upending that by giving this character more agency and more power than almost anyone else? Or again, is it just an idea he had that he needed to flesh out? And it's not frustrating because it works, but it's the sort of thing where I came out of Il Divo and some of his subsequent films too, thinking, oh, you just wanted to put that in there. There's no larger purpose. But here, like, it's a cornucopia. Everything fits.
Yeah, these are my polar opposite thoughts.
Okay.
Like literally exactly what you're talking about is I'm like, is this a brilliant mesh that like ended up working so well that kind of explores like the pretension in the art world, that explores this whole like opulence in such like explores it in a grotesque way. Like we see like the grossness of it, like that Botox scene is just, like there's just, and it's also like dreamlike, like the cinematography and how they're interwoven, and even just the cuts, like the way they get into another scene. It's very dreamlike. Like it almost feels like a bunch of vignettes that have been placed together. But it does work really well. And it's almost like my polar opposite mind is like, it's brilliant and it's all supposed to be there and everything means something. And like I need to continue to digest it and like feel it, because I feel that like what you said, you like I take it all in and I experience it instinctually. And are we experiencing this all with this writer who now does these culture pieces? Or is Sorrentini the pretentious artist that we are looking at in the film? Like, is he doing all this, but he has no idea what a vibration is? Like the artist who runs into the wall and she's like, I don't answer things, I go vibrations, and she can't say what that is to her. And not that language is the only way to communicate something, but it definitely helps us understand ourselves and sometimes understand what might be in our subconscious. So those are the polar opposite feelings I'm like having about it. Is like this, is this a pretentious film, or is this a film exploring the pretentiousness that someone's trying to get away from? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the point of La Dolce Vita, right? Like Fellini's film is about someone who's over it all and suddenly reconnects with feeling. But in order to understand where he is, we have to experience his world, which I think is what Sorrentino absolutely, more than most, is a vibes guy. As a filmmaker, he can
Style. Yeah.
commercial millions of dollars to create a sensibility, a texture to his films, which more often than not people seem to connect to. So, who am I to say it doesn't work? It doesn't always work for me. But what we see here is we need to be disgusted by it, right? Like we need to be steeped in it. The audience, I think, the audience for that performance piece early on, the Talia Concept performance piece, who are a bunch of middle-aged people staring quizzically and deciding when to applaud. That's, yeah, looking to see who else is clapping first, and then going really like big lusty applause, while Jep is just sort of, he claps twice and then puts his hands down. I think that's what he's trying to show us, which is the thing that was in La Dolce Vita too. Like everyone will follow you in a conga line to the next party if you tell them there's a party around the corner. And if Talia Concept, who refers to herself in the third person so much that Jep immediately calls her on it, which was my favorite scene in the film, is when a critic just gets to say, come on, man. That's the moment when I think the audience I saw it with was sort of laughing on Talia's side during that conversation, because the scene is about someone who refuses to play the game of the interview, but it's the twist to me is that it's the interviewer who is actually pressing for substance, rather than the artist who is the presupposed focus of this piece, who's just being so vague and ultimately familiar in her rebellion, right? Because she's not saying anything that dozens of other artists haven't said. It's just that she's done it by spectacular nudity and self-harm, which again, in Italy in 2013, yes, that'll catch your eye. But it's also presented to us with such disdain by the camera. Like,
Yeah.
we're not invited to admire this work of art. I think the way that the camera lingers on the hammer and sickle that have been shaved into this woman's body hair is a joke. Like, we are supposed to think, oh my God, really? Seriously? And it's dyed red.
Yeah.
And if we take it seriously, then we have to take her seriously. And I don't think that's the point of the scene. I think the point of the scene is showing us somebody who isn't actually going through the motions, even though he says he is, that he's still trying to get something real out of this person who has constructed a complete preposterous facade. So obviously, as a critic, it had me at that moment.
Yeah, totally. You must have been able to receive that in such a different way. And I think that's something else that's really, really cool about this film. You brought up like humor, and there is a lot of humor in it. And there's a lot of humor in the way they interact with each other, and also like especially that scene, but a lot of the different art scenes, like there's a lot of humor. Even the friend who's like putting on a play and like can't like chasing this woman who like clearly is using him. Like,
Yeah.
and there's so much humor in it. But I agree. I think Jep was really trying to actually just get a real answer from that woman. And he just wasn't going to get it. And it is, you said like a familiarity, and there is a familiarity in that woman as being like a typical artist, and not to, well, maybe to criticize, I don't know, but like that, like I'm making a statement and I'm going to do something insane and rebellious and I'm going to get the attention. And then he's like, basically like, why? And she's like, I'm not sure. Like, and so it is quite funny. But then he turns it into something really cool, and he like sits down with his agent. And I love those scenes too, when they sit down and they eat a meal together, and we really see this old relationship and this old friendship, kind of like with his house worker. I loved that. I think he's the most honest with her. He's so honest with her. He's like at the end when he's sitting with her and like looking at the party, he's like, this is my whole life. And like he's kind of like, why? For what?
Yeah. And she's the only one who knows what he means when he says that.
Yeah, because they would all be like, oh, this is great. We're up till 4 a.m. every night drinking. Like we won. And he's like, we didn't win.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a celebration of bourgeoisie that also hates them, which I think is really interesting from Sorrentino, because he is someone who tries to, I mean, in the same way that Il Divo is, it presents itself as ambiguous as to, or ambivalent really, as to the accomplishments of its central character, even though he's absolutely just the worst. The same way that Youth is about old men looking back and trying to figure out whether they like the people they've become. I find those things fascinating. Have you seen his American film, This Must Be the Place, the one with Sean Penn?
No, and I've known about it for years, and I know what it's about. Like I know the concept, and um no, I haven't seen it though. Only seen The Great Beauty, which I actually wonder if I've seen it in a different way because I don't know his work. Like I'm interested to watch his films, but I also don't want it to weirdly ruin The Great Beauty,
Yeah,
like
you don't want to break the spell.
yeah, because I'm enamored with it. I love the creativity of it, but I almost don't want to know that that's how he makes everything. It would almost break my heart.
Yeah, it's interesting. Luca Guadagnino is another director who's similar. I mean, right out of that same world, right? The intensity, the European intensity. I don't know there is no school yet, that nobody's named it, but that does feel like what they're both doing. Like, they immerse you in a world that is so beautiful and so rich, and then they show you just how kind of sticky and gross it is underneath when nobody's looking. Like, it's like watching someone change the sheets after a love scene is the only way I can. One of them must have said that, because that's not original to me, but I've read that somewhere, and it's like, that is exactly right. It's about the underbelly that you never see. You never see it in these movies. I mean, it comes close with Andrea, with the young man experiencing a mental health crisis for the entire film.
Go and do
Who,
thing. Just,
Yeah.
I'll give him Prozac or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, he's treated as a nuisance, but he is the result of neglect, right? Like he is the reason they are the reason he's like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and can't find any answers in it. And where did you bring up This Must Be the Place for a Reason? Like,
I did, yeah. It's the film of his that doesn't work at all, and it's because it's not in Italy. It's because it's removed from, well, it focuses on an American character. It's completely removed from the milieu of his other films, and that's fascinating to me. That he tried something. He came to America to make this film, and I mean they shot it all over the place, but it's an American production, and it's an idiom he just simply could not communicate in. And so he went back and just made more films about the world he knows. And it's a fascinating misfire. Like it isn't, it's watchable in a way that it shouldn't be because you're fascinated by watching Sean Penn and Francis McDormand try to give him what he wants and in the vibe that he's going for. And it just like the language is, it's like listening to digital noise of a recording. But it's really interesting because removed from his safety zone, he just didn't seem to know what to do. And also, of course, it's been cut to pieces and it's probably in no way a real reflection of the movie he set out to make. But it's really instructive compared to his other films in what he does that works and what he does that doesn't work. Yeah, I'd love to know what you think of it if you ever get a chance to see it.
it's you saying that. I'm like, okay, I'll watch that. I'll watch that of his because it sounds like I'm like, I get the sense of what you're saying, and that actually fascinates me. Like, I love seeing that stuff because an artist is such a like you're screwed when you start to make something because you can't not include yourself in it. And so that's him like attempting to include himself in it, but almost like missing a piece of where his creativity comes from, maybe, or where his expression comes from. Because like Rome is such a massive part of the Great Beauty. And I think probably the social and political um, atmosphere at the time, and maybe, I mean, it's probably shifted now just with everything that's happened since COVID and everything, but yeah, becoming a democracy and then having the ability to like have opulence is, I'm sure, greatly affects a political climate. I haven't spent a lot of time in Italy, so I can't really speak on that too much, but I did hear that a lot of Italians who live in Italy didn't like the film because they're like, that's not like, they were almost like angry at how it was being portrayed, but it was really only a certain part of society. He was like, it's kind of like the Wolf of Wall Street. We're seeing like, and it's made so like grand and cool that you're in the theater and you're like, oh yeah, but it's disgusting. Like
Yeah.
it's all so gross, and we're not seeing all the people that are losing their homes and suffering because of these guys that are screwing up the world. And so it's almost like that on like a obviously a lesser scale. And then also the woman, I think it's Stephanie, who he kind of calls her out. And I almost feel like he's the character's just so interesting because he calls her out, but I'm like, he has like an innate ability to be really honest, and I'm wondering if it's new in him or if he kind of lied to himself for 30 years and finally has been like, oh my gosh, like woke up at that party like, shoot, I've lied to myself. Because it's so much easier to be honest with other people than ourselves. And I don't know why that is. And Heath Ledger, who I've always been such a fan of his acting, and I wish we got to see more of it. He would say that he said something like, I'm really impressed when people can be honest with themselves. And I think this character is starting to be honest with himself. But I'm wondering if he like it would be so fascinating if he was a real human, because I know he's fictitious. Like, what was he like? Was he awful? Like, was he a misogynistic asshole? Because he kind of still is a little bit, but he's coming out of it. Like when he's laying with Ramon and like it was just nice to love each other, but not make love. It's like forgetting life and he's coming back to it and wondering if he was like a dick for a while or not.
Yeah, that's something I don't really get an answer to in the film either, because I have a feeling Sorrentino thinks he's always been a truth teller. I mean, just the way he handles that first interview where he's simply batting back all the tired stuff because he's old and she's young and she doesn't know she's saying things other people have said. And he's not even mean about it. He's just pressing her to go deeper, and she's not prepared to do it. And I think that's what happens if you listen to people for too long, which I think is a positive, right? I mean, he's a revered critic, not because he's mean, but he's honest in print in a way that I don't think he is in his own life. I think that's the contrast, is that finally starting to turn that lens on himself is the thing that changes him. Like that moment where he starts actually thinking about how he's behaved and who he's been, as opposed to just putting it out on the page and never thinking about it again. That seems to be the mechanism that Sorrentino wants to explore. It's just because it's such an external movie, because it's so much about environment, there's not a lot of room for small contemplative moments unless he's sharing them with somebody else, like his housekeeper or the person that he confides in bed when there's nothing else to do. Even that again, it's all my reference points are in the first 45 minutes before the movie even starts, which is so weird. But there's that other love scene where early on he's with a woman who brings him home and then apologizes for not being good in bed, and his line is, like, if you're good, you get too confident, which I think again is honest but gentle in a way that maybe he isn't on the page, because everybody loves him because he's such a rake.
Yeah.
But we don't see that in person. He doesn't insult people. He's just gently honest with them in ways that they're not necessarily ready to hear. And that makes me think of the audience that didn't like the film, because they're seeing themselves as the victims, as the targets. And they're not really. Those characters, maybe the real people watching the movie probably are more aware because they're being forced to look at themselves, but the characters in the film, they're not really being challenged, they're being indulged. And the longer they talk, the less it's clear, the less they have to say. So he gets to respond to that. And then maybe if you're one of the people who just likes to go to dinner parties to talk about immigration and childbirth and all that stuff, you feel seen, you feel called out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. He is not mean. Like him pressing her is not mean. He actually is respecting her as a creator and being like, no, let me understand you properly. And like you said, she's not ready or doesn't know or whatnot. Yeah. And he is gentle. Like he's sensible. And he kind of says that at some point, or we hear it in the voice over like his narration of like something about sensibility, like I wasn't born for it, I'm too sensible. And it's interesting too, knowing that there's a translation, because there's probably a few things we're losing, but hopefully we can pick it up through the actors. I've lost my train of thought. Oh, but yeah, at the dinner party, when his friend's going on and on, like, my work is influential, I've done important things, and she's pumping her own tires, and I'm with my kids, all this, and he doesn't call her out, and he lets her criticize him, and he only does it when he says, "Are you sure you want the truth?" And then he has like very specific evidence, but he's not yelling at her. He's not like, it's like, you, okay, kind of asked. And then we see these like nice little moments, like you said, it's so external that we're almost experiencing his inner world through how he's seeing the external world, like the kid who's just bawling and has to do this painting, or him seeing the giraffe. And it's like, I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, is that actually there? Like, and same with the flamingos, like, is that actually there? And I think that's one of the most powerful things of the movie to me, is these images that apparently they're actually there because other characters are experiencing them at the same time. But there's part of me that feels like I don't know still if they're real. Because it feels so grand.
Impossible.
Yeah, it feels impossible. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder too. It feels like that's another Fellini draw for me. Like charming woman is wandering around having conversations with saints, and everybody's just like, "Yes, sure you are," but we see it. We're part of it. We're invited into those conversations. But the magic of those moments is that she believes it fully, so it doesn't even matter if it's not happening.
Right. Yes, I like that. That's really cool. Yeah, and it's like him seeing the ocean on the ceiling and that like we can all travel, all we have to do is close our eyes. Like I love that. It's so beautiful that our imagination is so powerful and vivid. And so you're right, if it's real to the character, it's real to us and it's real. I'm doing air quotes for those.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the recent releases of Night Swim, Lisa Frankenstein, and Monolith, and how hard it is to negotiate the increasing chasm between elevated horror and the more fun stuff. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. And the ocean also opens up to one of this memory where he almost died. If we're to take it as a memory, because we're told like it's setting up in that photograph of the girl who we then see on the beach watching this incident, in which the older Jep is replaced by the younger Jep, and we're just drifting into a memory. And maybe, and of course that's Elisa. That's the woman that got away, that he didn't realize had gotten away, but the love of his life presumably, or someone who thought he was the love of hers. And so he sees the ocean before he learns Elisa has died. So maybe that has haunted him. Maybe he has been thinking of her all along. Right? We just don't see the full we don't see the full memory until a little bit later. But that same shot of the ocean on the ceiling is the one with the boat cutting through it that he sees later, and that's where Elisa is. So yeah, I mean it's a rich text, right? Like it can be anything you want it to be. Maybe it's a completely unrelated memory, but if so, why are we seeing it? I mean, that's the thing I love about film. Like a movie will tell you how to interpret it, even if it's not even if it remains ambiguous to the characters. We get the roadmap just through the chronology.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't place those together. That's the boat that cuts through.
Yeah,
And I do feel like he's missed her and thinks about her. Like even when he goes back to ask her to read the diary, and it's an interesting thing. Like I kept rewinding and listening to the conversation, and I just was like, I wish I could understand Italian. So, but when he's like, could you have kids? When the man comes to tell, I think her husband comes to tell him that she's passed away, and he says, I could. And I still don't understand what that moment was. And if he hadn't, you know, you're saying you think he hasn't thought about her or the love of his life that got away and now she's brought back up and he's like maybe questioning like, oh, did I let something really magical go? But I don't know what that conversation between those two men was. Like I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think we're on the outside deliberately. We really don't see most of it.
Mm.
He's Jep is trying to talk him down ultimately, to let him know that she still loved him, and he refuses. He absolutely refuses to accept it. Elisa's widow. Does he even have a name? I don't think he's ever identified by name. But he says, like, no, I was just a companion for 35 years. I was a good companion, but it's clearly not enough for him. And he's grieving and he's broken, and even if he moves on, which is implied, he'll never get over this slight. And it's similar to the whole "do you want me to tell you" scene, right? Because he broke the lock on the diary and read it. He wasn't supposed to know that.
Yeah, I hated that. I hated hearing that. Like I really did. I felt it. I was like, oh, like to find that out. He's like, and I one line in the diary. I was like, it makes me sad thinking about. I'm like, fuck. Yeah, yeah. It's it's like Elise is almost the through line of the film in a way, because we end with it, and I don't know what the ending means. And I really don't. And I didn't know what it meant the first time I watched it. I've seen it a few times. I don't know the last time, which was literally last night. Um, and like the only thing I could kind of like start to pull out of it is there's a spirituality to the whole film in a way, despite the like the music, the singing, where he lives. Like there's just a through line. The where we are, like the rooms we're in, there's a spirituality to it. And the nun at the end, which is so amazing. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is human. Where did they find this woman? And I'm wondering if like, is it, and he says like, says I haven't written a novel because I've been looking for the great beauty. And then at the end, it's like, is the great beauty death then? And once he can accept that, he can write again? Or is it happiness? Or is, and maybe there is no answer, but I've never figured it out. Maybe that's why I want to talk about it so bad.
I mean, I think it's life itself, which is trite in another way. But if that's what kills the tourist at the beginning, the realization that, everything here is designed to celebrate life, because that's where the party comes in. And it's just, there's so much vibrancy, even though it's all empty calories, right? Like these people are living. And I think his novel is going to be about his own life, his
Yeah.
romance, his life with Elise. That's what we end on, right? The flashback is what wakes him up and he thinks he knows what he's going to do next. Or maybe the novel he writes is the movie we've just seen, which is a little meta touch that I always like.
Yeah, that was another thought I had too, was like, oh, we just watched the novel, which, and it would be interesting because novels are so, like, we get all the thoughts and we get the description. So we're kind of getting that through how it's shot, like through the Steadicam movements, how he reveals everything. The lighting is like so intense. Like it's almost, yeah, that's, I like that. I like the meta touch. Yeah, but it being like, it almost, that almost like annoys me. Like I'm like, really? But not from you, but
No,
I'm
I
like,
know. Is that all there is?
like, could it be more complicated for me? And I don't know why. Like, yeah, is that all there is? But I don't know. Now we get philosophical of like about all that. But I almost want it to be more. Yeah, I almost want it to be deeper or something. I don't know.
I mean, if this is the book, if we're watching him tell his own story, which would also explain the narration and some other things that we, like perspective shifts, I would think about the scene where the little girl Francesca goes missing in the church,
Yeah,
and when he finds her, she says, "Oh, you're nothing. Like you're not anyone," which is the moral, right? Like that is sort of the theme of the book, and it feels a lot like some 19th century novel about soul searching and a man finding out that he does really mean nothing, and that all of his all of his society power and all of his connections are ultimately just empty consolation to a life that's been wasted. And I think about the ending of the shipwreck of the Costa Concordia, where instantly, you have an eat the rich metaphor that doesn't exist anywhere else in the film. But the statement that all of this will come to nothing, that nature and time will take you out the same way it takes everyone else, whether they have money or not. You can't take it with you. You can't take your reputation with you. Maybe, if he continues living this way, he'll have a really pretty headstone, but no one will read him. That'll be forgotten. And, being an entertainment journalist and film critic in the 2010s is an excellent crash course in that. Everything this film is saying was dead right. It's all coming to an end. But it's horrible, and I don't like to think about it. But there is some truth to this idea of him searching for meaning in others rather than himself, and that's why he's unfulfilled.
yeah, definitely. And searching for validation from an external source, which is very human, and I think probably felt by most people. And we do need that at times, but then maybe it does leave us not really sure what our identity is. Because I think that maybe he's seeking a bit of that. He's seeking a bit of his identity in the film too. And realizing that maybe he's lost it in this opulence. I found actually like a moment where I felt like I saw who he was without the layers was he's telling Ramona in this like fabulous location. She's trying on the funeral dresses. Like a funeral is for high society. You do this, you do this, you do this to appear right. And you don't cry. And then because you take it away from the grieving family. And then he has to carry the casket out because the son doesn't have any friends there to do it. And he carries the casket out and he's crying. And Ramona sees him crying. And I question if he did it was he letting himself cry to take the attention, or was he unable to stop himself because he was actually feeling the loss? And I like to believe the latter just for myself, um, but he still was part of that group that needed that validation. So that could also be another moment of him slipping back into, I want people to see me upset. I want to take the attention. It's always about me. It's about me again. Like
Yeah,
it's kind of, it's almost like he's a recovering narcissist in a way.
it's really nicely put. He does seem to be struggling to control himself, but again, what if it's a performance, right? Because that's exactly what you do. And it isn't until the very end of the film that we really get to see him make that choice to not be that guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe it's just a reflex.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That goes back to like our kind of our little character analysis of of the truth telling. Like, has he always been like that with other people, but not with himself? And like, that's almost him manipulating the world around him to serve himself. Like, very, um, yeah, like that. Like, I'm trying to think of the right word. Like, he's creating the reality he wants, and he's been granted the position to create that reality because he had a really successful book. And then
Right.
since then, he's like, I shall manipulate the world around me to serve essentially an ego. And at the end, he does, he says it. He's like, ego, ego, ego. I think they actually, I noticed the subtitles when he's saying that, it's around the end of the film. They say ego, etc., but he goes ego, ego, ego in Italian. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like he's really drilling into it. And he can analyze other people so well, and it's like he's turning that on himself. I would almost be interested to have someone do that to me, but then never find out, like, don't tell me. I don't want to know.
All right. They'll just present you with the locked journal at the end and you have to choose to open it.
Oh my gosh, how awful would that be? What would you do?
I would burn it right away.
I was like, I think I'd burn it before like I could choose to open it. I'd be like, light it on fire. Yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And that makes it like, that is the most relatable thing. You mentioned earlier, artists are all, afraid of hearing something terrible about them because all you have when you create is your confidence that this is something the world needs to see. And then as soon as there's any creation, if it's not immediately followed by insecurity and self-doubt, then I'm afraid that person might be a sociopath.
Yeah, because you're right. I think it comes with it. It's an insane vulnerability that comes with an artist. And the film, it's actually quite smart that he chose to make the lead character a culture art critic, because he's able to see, he's looking at that. He's looking at all this vulnerability. And that's essentially what it is. If you don't have self-doubt or yeah, it's like, of course, because you're essentially cutting a little part of yourself out and you're like, hey world, I just thought maybe you'd want to see this. And then you leave it there. And it's really, I think really truly great art and great storytelling is um is a deep means of connection with other people. I don't think that it is an egotistical endeavor when it's done to connect with others, because I've definitely left a movie changed. I've definitely looked at a painting that's made me cry. And that I'm like, there's truth and feeling in that. And I think that the character is trying to like find his way back to that. And I think that's what he had in his first book, or I hope he had that in his first book, and then he got scared. And I'm like, yeah, terrifying to create stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's the essential imposter syndrome, that even if Jep doesn't have it, we know about it from the film, because you don't want to be those people. You don't want to be enjoying yourself at 4 a.m. in your 60s because you're afraid to go to sleep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that even you saying that, like you just making yourself stay up because you're scared to go to sleep. I'm like, oh, I sleep really good now, but I used to have trouble sleeping, and I wouldn't go out partying till 4 a.m. to like, but I know the feeling of like, oh, can I just sleep? Like, and yeah, just like what is he avoiding? That's essentially like the question that you kind of just brought up. Like, and he's like he is unable to avoid it anymore, almost.
Yeah. Whatever it is, he's been dodging. I mean, it's another one of the early scenes where he's in the kitchen and his housekeeper finds him and he says, "Sir has been up since 6:30. Sir doesn't know what to do with himself."
Yeah. I remember hearing that line last night and being like, oh my gosh, like, does that mean he's up every night till late? And I was like, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a moment in the film um that you like that stood out to you in a way, like a like to for me it's the young girl making the painting. I've thought about it for years. I can't I think about it every so often. I'm like, whoa, that was crazy. She's just bawling like I just want to play. And is there a moment like that for you? Because it's so vignette-y.
Yeah, I think if I have a moment that I think about, it is the "You're Nobody" scene. Because it's just, you don't even get to see the kid yet. She's there, but she's not there. She might be someone he's imagining, except that her mother ultimately finds her and she's just on the floor below. But even then, we don't see her face, which is just kind of eerie and odd. And maybe that's the wake up call rather than well, no, because it comes after, doesn't it? It comes after he leaves Elisa's widow. So maybe it's confirmation that he isn't the person he wanted to be, or like the outside world is finally saying, "I don't see you, I don't recognize you." And if he's a culture writer, he's who supposedly, if he's as celebrated as he appears to be in the film, that he can command these massive parties and that people want him to publish his collected interviews and everything else, that that voice, hearing that from a real person, is probably terrifying, because it's someone he doesn't know. It's someone who doesn't have anything to gain from flattering him.
And it's a kid.
And
Kids are so honest because they don't know that it's rude yet.
exactly. And it may be true. And if it's true, it's the same thing he does to other people, right? It's just being turned on him in a way that he's incapable of processing.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And it's so simple too, to be like, you're nothing. And also such a freeing statement. Like, we're all the same. And it reminds me of the line at the end about the nun saying, like, you have to experience poverty. And again, I was like, is this is this just a line that he's like, I like this? Or is this a comment on like the massive gap between how he's lived his life and how someone else has lived it? And I don't think I don't think the nun is judging them in that moment. I think I'm not really sure what that moment is, but it reminds it's similar to the scene with you're nothing, um, in a way. But then I go back, it's that duality in my mind about like, or is that the pretentiousness of the artist? I don't know, but we'll never know.
It could be both. I mean, it could be designed to work in either way, depending on the person watching, right? I mean, the film doesn't change, but the audience is always different. And different people respond to it different. Some people felt attacked by it, and other people were like, "Yeah, tell him, stick it to him, tell him the truth."
Mhm. Yeah, it's true. I feel like I landed right in the middle where I just was an observer. It's like I I that's definitely not my world. It's also not my culture. But yeah, I feel like I landed in the middle of it, and the film to me felt like a painting. Like I felt like the whole film was a painting. Like even the story, there's not like a plot. There is, but there's not.
No, it's episodic. Yeah, I mean, it can be a comedy, it can be a drama, it can be a tragedy. It's all of those things at different times.
And you could make like we could plot out the film like in like a typical American sense, like how American films are, they're essentially kind of they always follow that similar structure. And I think that's why European films are so nice, is they break free a bit more of that. Or I think they do. You know this better than me.
Well, this is the weird contradiction, right? Because we see the ones that make it out. We don't see the
Right.
commercial films that are designed for those specific audiences. But the reason they make it out is because they're perceived as either exotic or groundbreaking or different enough, right, to play to a North American crowd. I think, especially given the failure of the Sean Penn movie he just made, like he ran back to his strengths, to a film about Italy, to a film about the politics and the culture and the people. But that made it, and I wonder if maybe the whole "I need to rethink my life" thing was the result of that. Even though he's applied it to a 65-year-old man instead of somebody much younger, it was applied to his attempt to make an American movie and just the way it tanked. But I do think that its need to be an Italian film and a specific cultural flavor is the reason that it resonates, because he caught something, whether he meant to or not. Like his satire of the bourgeoisie and intelligentsia, however you want to say it, there's something real in there that he wanted to get at, and it came out, and it's captured in the film in a really fascinating way. You're watching someone look at the world that produced him and the world that presumably after El Divo was applauding him,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
decide, oh, if you guys are my allies, I don't need that. That's not what I want.
Yeah, that's an interesting interpretation of it too. And just, yeah, the strengths of an artist and whether he meant to or not, or like letting both exist, like letting that pretension in the film, but also in an artist exist, and not in a judgmental way, just being part of being human. And I watched a little interview with him. I think it was actually at TIFF from 2013. And he said like it was kind of based on part of how he was feeling in some of his life. And it could have been after the success of El Divo, like, being in those circles. And I don't know if it won at Cannes or was nominated or what.
Il Divo won the jury prize
Oh, wow.
in 2008. And weirdly, This Must Be the Place won the Ecumenical Prize in 2011. And Great Beauty was nominated. It was in the official competition for the Palme d'Or, but it did not win.
Oh, okay. And then following was a campaign by Norm to have LGBT.
I mean, I would like it. I would have preferred it had gone another way. I'll admit it. But I get it, right? Like the jury prize is the second best. It's like it's the most. I think generally it's for the most directed, for the most artistic expression, and Il Divo is certainly that. Technically, it is a very complex film, and he shot it. He shot the hell out of it. I just hated it.
Shot the hell out of it. I love that. He shot the hell out of it. Yeah, I always get very much into the actors, and like you said it right at the beginning, like the emotions. And I think of Cassavetes because, it's not like he was making the most cinematically complex films, but he's so revered and respected because the characters and the actors were so good. Like they were always so good. And it kind of didn't matter if it was shot perfectly. We were so there with them. I I love that.
Yeah, but with Cassavetes, you come out thinking the camera's always in the right place. Like you don't think about the cinematography, but he catches everything.
Yeah, like you're there as a human. Yeah, true. Very true. Yeah.
It's something that always struck me. I mean, there's a scene where the camera jumps off like I think it's Faces, right? The camera jumps off a rooftop onto the beach. Seymour Cassel, or maybe it was Shadow. Seymour Cassel told a story once about how every time he did it, it's like, I'm breaking my ankle a little bit at a time for this shot. And the camera would just shoot off right behind him because he had to roll out of the way. And it was this incredibly technical. He said, he was joking, he said it was the most technical thing that Cassavetes ever did, was just make sure he doesn't get crushed by the camera right behind him.
Gosh,
But ooh, if you can talk people into doing that for you,
I'd do it. I'd do it for him. I would have.
Well, this in a weird way, like this brings me to your film, to Wild Goat Surf, because it is not a it's not exactly a vibes film, but it is about the mood of that moment that these characters are sharing. And it does seem like you're trying to recreate a specific place and time, not just in texture, but in emotion. Like you're telling a story about a mother and a daughter who aren't really connecting, each have their own thing to deal with. But over the course of the film, we understand who they are, why they are, and where they are becomes the sort of the catalyst for eventually getting like reconnecting with themselves.
Yeah, it's like definitely the location is huge because Goat is stuck by a lake and she wants to be at an ocean. And that's there's obviously metaphor in that, as it were, but really that need to go to the ocean and that need to, like, how she idolizes her father and idolizes the ocean is really her experiencing grief. It's her trying to stay connected to him in some way, and this is the only way she knows how. And so she puts that on a pedestal. And yeah, like I know the Great Beauty influenced some of the more dreamlike scenarios. Like one of my favorite things we did was that like little push into the RV window and then she's out there on the beach. I love that. And that was like I really wanted to get the ocean on the ceiling at some point, a little nod to the Great Beauty. But we did those little moments of her mentally escaping to be close to something that she doesn't know anything about. Um, we got a few of those in different ways, which I'm really happy we did. With the water on her face, sometimes subtle ways, but nice ways, and opening with the ocean stuff. And it's interesting too, you say like her and Jane not connecting, and I think they have such a unique relationship, like such a beautiful relationship for a mother and daughter who are going through what they are going through. They really, like, she would never tell Sharon that Goat was wrong, but she would tell Goat in private that she was wrong.
Yeah, Jane, I mean, the more we watch it, the more it's clear that she's doing everything she can to connect. But it's just this gap between them, the grief, really, the divide between them that's causing this gap that they have to overcome together, even if they don't know how.
Yeah, grief and I think also like life circumstances of, having a couple jobs and Goat almost sometimes having to be the more mature one, like doing the laundry, um, holding her mother sometimes, like she's Goat in a lot of ways is very, very mature. And there is that the score, I'm really, really love the score. It's by Kane McKenzie. And we spoke about how that was almost like religion to her, like the ocean was almost religion to her, or spirituality. And so that organ kind of reflecting that in the water, and that kind of how she's processing her grief. And it isn't until she can actually touch the ocean that she can maybe accept that her father's not there for whatever reason, whether he actually died or not, her father's not there. And he's not gonna be there.
Yeah, but it ends. I mean, it ends the same way that Great Beauty ends. They're going to be okay. Like there is spoilers, but there is hope.
Yeah. There is. And I had an audience member the other day tell me how she felt, and I was so happy to hear it. She's like, I feel like it's so happy, but also I'm really sad. And I was like, yeah. I was like, that's exactly what it is it's so sad. It's so sad to let things go. And it's so hard. And we don't know what's gonna happen. So they're letting go of all this, a lot of the film is about nostalgia in a way and not being able to let go. And I think Jane is holding on to this place and this motorhome and she's holding on to that life. She doesn't want to let it go. And it isn't until she lets it go that she can help her daughter as well. And so that end, it's bittersweet. I felt it The Great Beauty did it really nice. You're like, oh, you want more for him in a way, like that character. And I know as a me, Caitlyn wants Goat's not real, but I'm like, I want more for Goat.
It's one of those things where you realize that so many of the problems in the movie, dramatic obstacles, could be eliminated with one good conversation. And the whole point of the film, and The Great Beauty too, is about getting to the point where you can have that conversation with yourself. And, Goat comes of age in a weird, obvious way, but also in a really subtle way. There's stuff going on that she has to understand. And talking about it does sound reductive, right? Because it's in the face of the character. It's the acting that brings it out. It's the emotions. It's the thing I always connect to. And it's the same way that, watching Jep finally figure himself out takes 2.25 hours and 30 odd years of his life. But for us, it's just like, oh, we get the fast forward version. And with Wild Goat Surf, we get everybody figuring themselves out in what feels like real time at the end, where you just get to sit with them and experience it. That's a positive. That's not a negative thing. Like real time can be great.
I was just gonna say thank you so much. I like that you felt that. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, and I think they are figuring that out. And I think they're helping figure it out together. Like they're reflecting things back on each other too, which is really nice. And Shaylin Martin's just like so good. Fantastic. That was the first time her as the person touched the ocean.
Oh, really? That
was cool to shoot, like cool to see that too. Yeah. But yeah, it is I think it's that whole like it's really hard to be honest with yourself. And I think there's an immaturity to Jane that she's kind of trying to cover up, but she's a child. Like she hasn't grown up. She hasn't been able to grow up. And I think that this is the first steps of her growing up is her taking this move. But she's like going to work and she's doing that stuff, but she's no older than Goat in a lot of ways. She doesn't really realize how her actions are affecting Goat till Goat tells her, like, but you do it. And she's like, it hits her like, you're reflecting me, like I'm affecting you with everything I do. And it doesn't mean she's not loving and kind. I think Jane has such a big heart, but I think she's also very childish.
Yeah, I mean, it's a coming of age for both of them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because to me, it's so obviously Goat's coming of age film, and I haven't thought about it in that way for her as well. And Goat gets to experience it as a young person. It's really cool.
Yeah, they drag each other forward.
Yeah, exactly.
My thanks to Caitlyn Sponheimer, whose first feature, Wild Goat Surf, is now playing in theaters in Vancouver and Toronto. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Caitlyn on Instagram at The Spawn, all one word, THESPON, and you can find The Great Beauty in a fabulous Blu-ray special edition from the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on the Criterion channel and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhep.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.